I wish I could say I didn't see it coming. But I've learned that with my mother, humiliation comes dressed in pearls and a smile. When Diane invited me to her anniversary dinner, just a few close friends and family, she'd said over the phone in that breezy, distracted tone of hers, I already knew what it meant. It meant pageantry. It meant a parade of perfect lives and perfectly curated conversations where I, once again, would be cast as the disappointing footnote. Still, I said yes. I'd always say yes, not because I expect anything to change, but because the small, foolish part of me still believes she might one day look at me and see something worth admiring, or at the very least, stop pretending I don't exist. The dinner was held at the Hawthorne Club, a place where chandeliers hung like icicles from the ceiling and the menus didn't have prices. I arrived 10 minutes early, not out of eagerness but habit. I was raised to believe being early was respectful, though respect doesn't often travel both ways in my family. I stepped through the grand entrance in a black dress that skimmed my knees, clean lines, modest neckline, no frills. A dress that said, I'm here to belong, not I'm here to compete. My hair was pulled back in a soft bun, and my makeup was minimal. I looked presentable. Not impressive, certainly not provocative. Just safe. I carried a small rat box in my hand, a vintage crystal decanter I'd found on a business trip in Montreal. My mom liked things that sparkled. I thought she might appreciate it. Now looking back, I wonder if she even unwrapped it. The moment I stepped into the dining room, I saw the layout. Long rectangular table, white linens, crystal glasses that caught the candlelight just so. My siblings were already seated halfway down the table, Michelle ever radiant in her navy sheath dress, leaning in toward David, who looked mid-story and wholly self-satisfied. Around them were the usual faces, friends of my parents from church, from Dad's law firm, from Diane's charity luncheons. People who asked about me not because they cared, but because they needed something to fill the silence between bites. And me, my place card sat at the farthest end of the table, near the edge, next to a man I didn't recognize, older, silver hair, sharp cheekbones, expensive-looking watch. He was flipping through the wine list, not looking up. I felt my chest tighten, but I walked to my seat anyway. I didn't look toward my mother. I didn't need to. This wasn't an oversight. It was choreography. I was placed where I couldn't contribute, couldn't be seen, couldn't disrupt her curated picture of maternal success. It was her way of reinforcing the story she liked to tell. Michelle saves lives, David wins cases, and Vanessa. Well, Vanessa's figuring it out. Still, I smiled. I'm good at that. I'd had practice. You learn to smile when your own mother treats you like an unfortunate side effect of parenting. I greeted the man next to me with a quiet hello, set the decanter gift by the centerpiece, and folded my napkin neatly in my lap. As the evening unfolded, I watched it play out like a play I had already memorized. Michelle talked about new surgical techniques, name-dropping hospitals I'd only read about. David spoke about a high-profile case involving a hedge fund and wire fraud. Laughter bubbled up easily from their end of the table. My mother beamed, her wine glass tilted just so, her earrings catching the light as if they, too, were applauding her children's success. Every now and then, someone would glance my way, offer a polite smile, then look back toward the real action. No one asked what I'd been working on. No one mentioned my company. No one seemed to know or care that I'd recently closed a deal that could triple our valuation within the year. It wasn't just neglect, it was erasure, and somehow that stung more. The man beside me finally spoke once to ask if I preferred red or white. His voice was low, confident, like someone used to being listened to. I told him red. He nodded once and ordered a bottle I'd never heard of but knew I couldn't afford on my own. For a few minutes we sat in silence, sipping, listening to the soundtrack of clinking cutlery and performative conversation. That should have been my cue to withdraw, to retreat inside myself and let the evening pass. But something inside me flickered, something that refused to be quiet tonight. Maybe it was the wine, or the years of being treated like a temporary inconvenience in my own family. Or maybe, for once, I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't just sit there and take it. But I didn't make the first move. Someone else did. Halfway through the wine and the curated politeness, the conversation veered toward careers, like it always did at these things. It was practically a family tradition. Diane hosts a dinner, guests sip expensive wine, and everyone takes turns updating the table on their professional conquests like show horses parading the arena. No one ever said it outright, but the room always split into two camps, those who were doing something with their lives, and those who weren't. Guess which side I usually ended up on? David naturally led the charge. He spoke with the smooth, confident cadence of a man who billed by the hour and enjoyed the sound of his own voice. "It's a merger and acquisition case," he said, turning slightly so more people could hear. "The client's based in London, and we're fighting over IP that could be worth, conservatively, 9 figures. Polite gasps followed. Head tilts of admiration. Mon reached over to squeeze his arm, eyes gleaming like he'd just come home with a Nobel. Michelle chimed in next. She never boasted. She didn't have to. "We're piloting a new robotic cardiac technique," she said with the soft humility that only made her brilliance harder to ignore. "It's still in trial, but early results are promising." People leaned in. Someone asked a question about the machine. Another about the risks. Michelle answered gracefully, demure and impressive as always. Then a guest, someone from church, I think, turned to my mother and asked, "And what's Vanessa doing these days?" That was the moment, the one that split everything clean down the middle. My mother laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite deflection, a full, unrestrained, performative laugh that echoed across the linen and silver. "Oh, Vanessa," she said, as if the name itself were a punchline. She lifted her wineglass slightly and waved her hand dismissively. "She's barely employed." Laughter followed, not raucous, but compliant. Enough to let her words settle in and get cozy. The kind of laughter that doesn't need to believe something is true. It just needs permission to condescend. Heads nodded, eyebrows raised in faux sympathy. I watched it wash over the table like a spill that no one bothered to clean. And I sat there, perfectly still, except for my right hand, which clenched around the napkin in my lap so tightly the fabric trembled. Barely employed? That phrase rang in my ears not because it was new, but because it was so practiced, so easily deployed. Like it was a line she'd rehearsed, waiting for the perfect audience. Never mind that I'd built PulseLink from nothing but sleepless nights and a half-dead laptop. Never mind that I negotiated 6-figure contracts and answered to no one. Never mind the 12 people who depended on my leadership every day. To her, none of that counted. Not because she didn't understand it, but because acknowledging it would mean admitting I'd built something she couldn't take credit for. I glanced around the table. Michelle's gaze was suddenly focused on her wineglass. David wore that smug half-smile he reserved for watching people unravel. No one spoke. No one challenged her, just like always. Except for him. The man seated beside me, who until then had said barely a word, set down his glass and leaned forward with the calm precision of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. "Really?" he said, loud enough to interrupt the moment but soft enough to be unsettling. "That's strange. Vanessa owns PulseLink." He said it so plainly, so factually, that the words landed like steel on porcelain. He turned to face the table more directly. "I just invested $3 million in her last funding round. And that was it. No flourish, no fanfare, just the truth dropped like a stone in the center of the table. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. This one was weighty, embarrassed. It clawed up from between the white linens and into every throat. I felt the shift in the air, first disbelief, then dawning recognition. My mother's face blanched, her lips parted just slightly, as if trying to catch a lie that had already escaped. I could see the guests doing the math in their heads, remembering the man next to me, the quiet one, sharply dressed, clearly someone. They knew now he wasn't just a stranger. He was the kind of man people tried to impress, not patronize. No one laughed this time. And I, still holding that napkin like a lifeline, didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My mother's face turned ghost white, so quickly it was almost theatrical. One moment she was basking in the warm glow of admiration, surrounded by the cozy validation of her friends, and the next, stripped bare, exposed. Color draining from her cheeks as if someone had quietly opened a valve and let the confidence spill out. "Why you did?" she managed, blinking in rapid, uneven bursts. Her voice, usually so pointed and crisp, wobbled. Every pair of eyes at the table shifted toward her, and the silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was suffocating. Heavy. The kind of silence that forces people to sit a little straighter, breathe a little slower, check their expressions before they betray too much. The man beside me, Mr. Harold Langston, didn't flinch. He didn't bask in the moment or exploit the tension. He merely nodded with a calm, almost gentle certainty. Yes, he said, with the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised to be felt. Her pitch deck was one of the best I've seen, and I've been in tech since Netscape. A murmured wow floated from somewhere down the table. A few heads tilted. A fork paused midair. Someone cleared their throats softly. The tiny seismic shifts of a group recalibrating its perception of a person they dismissed minutes earlier. She's building something game-changing, he continued. I stayed perfectly still, my body a stiff, overheated shell. My fingers had gone numb against the fabric of my dress, and though my face burned, the rest of me felt oddly distant, like I was watching my own humiliation unravel in reverse. Mom tried to recover, but she didn't understand the rules of this new terrain. She'd spent her entire life believing reputation was crafted with tone, with posture, with the subtle manipulation of a room's attention. She didn't understand that real credibility speaks for itself, that it doesn't need a smile or a stage or a carefully curated dinner table. Well, she began, attempting a laugh that fell flat. I knew she was doing something with computers. There were few things more painful than watching someone cling to the remnants of superiority after they'd already fallen. She straightened her shoulder straps, lifted her chin a fraction too high, forcing poise into a moment that was quickly unraveling. Langston chuckled, but it wasn't unkind. It was the soft, knowing laugh of someone who recognized insecurity when he saw it. More than that, he said, she's on track to scale internationally by next year. He let that land. Then, with a glance toward her, not confrontational but pointed, he added, "Didn't you say she was barely employed?" The words hung there, suspended between us like a blade. Her friends shifted uncomfortably. Someone took a sip of water they didn't want. Someone else folded their hands so tightly their knuckles whitened. David stopped pretending not to listen. Michelle's eyes flickered up for a second, guilty and conflicted, before dropping again. My mother stammered, the polished veneer cracking like thin ice under too much weight. "It was just a joke," she said weakly. "But why joke about your daughter like that?" Langston asked. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't scold. He simply asked, and that made it infinitely worse. A question like that doesn't seek an answer. It reveals one. A hush fell over the table, as if every breath was being held hostage by the truth now sitting between us. The chandelier light caught the rim of my water glass and split into fragments, dancing across the linen like reflections of something breaking, quietly, elegantly, inevitably. "You should be proud," he added, his tone calm but final. The kind of finality that shifts the axis of a conversation, the hierarchy of a family, the balance of a room. I didn't dare look at my mother. I didn't want to see whatever contorted mixture of anger, embarrassment, defensiveness, and realization flickered across her features. Not yet. My eyes stayed forward, my posture rigid, as warmth crawled up my neck and pulled at my ears. That moment, it's difficult to describe. It felt like watching the foundation of her ego crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but like porcelain under too much pressure. Microfractures first, invisible, then a split, then another, until suddenly the entire structure of who she believed herself to be, a mother who raised 2 successes in one project, no longer held. Right between the butter knives and the untouched rolls, it shattered. For the first time in my life, she was forced to see me not as an accessory to her image, but as a woman standing entirely outside her shadow, someone she could not control, diminish, or rewrite. And she had no script for that. The shift was subtle at first, like the change in a room's temperature you only notice after you've stopped paying attention. Guests had started rising from their seats. The hum of conversation, once tight and orderly, loosened into a freer murmur. Plates were cleared, coffee carts rolled in. Someone announced there'd be port in the lounge, but the real movement, the one that mattered, came in the way eyes began turning toward me. Not to dismiss, not to pity, but to see. "Vanessa," someone said, an older woman I vaguely recognized from one of Mom's charity galas. "What was the name of your app again?" I told her PulseLink, and before I could finish, a man behind her leaned in. "Is it in healthcare or logistics?" he asked. "Healthcare infrastructure," I replied, but with a focus on decentralized emergency response. He raised his eyebrows. "Smart. That's a serious gap in the market." Another voice chimed in. "Are you hiring?" I turned to see a young woman, 20s, probably someone's daughter or niece, standing slightly apart, hopeful in that way people get when they've finally found something worth aspiring to. I answered her question, gave her my card, and for the first time all night I felt the room tilting toward me, not away. The spotlight, once centered firmly on David's closing arguments and Michelle's surgical triumphs, had shifted without fanfare. No applause, no grand moment. Just a slow reorientation of attention, like iron filings bending toward a new magnetic force. Even David, who had made a sport of ignoring me since we were children, glanced over from the dessert table, his mouth parted as if he might say something. But he didn't. Michelle looked at me, not with condescension or practiced compassion, but something more complicated. She didn't speak either, but she didn't look away. Mom, for most of it, kept her distance. She laughed too loudly at someone's story, adjusted the sleeve of her dress more than once. I could feel her watching, though. Not overtly, but through those occasional glances, the kind that scan, assess, retreat. Eventually, when most of the guests had filtered toward the lounge or stepped outside for air, she found me. We were near the powder room, one of those opulent corners with fresh flowers in crystal vases and hand towels that felt like silk. She stood in front of me, hands clasped, eyes just slightly unfocused, like she was still deciding which mask to wear. Her voice, when it came, was lower than usual. Softer, but not quite apologetic. "I didn't know it was that serious, Vanessa," she said. "You never talk about it." I looked at her, really looked at her. The delicate makeup starting to crease around her eyes, the pearl necklace she'd worn to every important event for 20 years, the familiar tightness in her jaw that always appeared when she felt out of control. I kept my voice even, no theatrics, just truth. "Because you never ask." She blinked. "You always assumed I was failing," I added, "and after a while I stopped offering explanations you didn't want to hear." She opened her mouth, closed it, and swallowed. Maybe I made some wrong assumptions. It was a rare admission, the kind that came not from self-awareness but from undeniable evidence. She couldn't dismiss me now without discrediting the man who had just spoken so highly of me in front of 24 of her closest allies. I nodded, but there was no warmth in it. Not yet, just acknowledgement. "You did," I said, "but I didn't build this for your approval." I paused, not for effect, but because I needed to breathe through the weight of it. The years, the silence, the slow chipping away of self-worth that had started at kitchen tables just like this one. "I built it because I believed in myself," I said, "even when you didn't." She didn't respond right away. Her expression shifted, confusion first, then something close to regret, though not fully formed. She looked for a moment, like a woman standing in front of a version of her daughter she didn't recognize. One she hadn't expected, one she hadn't prepared for. And I walked away. Not in anger, not in triumph, just with certainty. I walked away not because I needed to make a point, but because, for the first time, I didn't need anything from her. Not her pride, not her praise, not even her understanding. I had already earned something greater. Self-respect. On my own terms, the conference center buzzed with anticipation, the kind that gathers in the air before the first keynote, before the lights dim and the stories begin. Outside, morning light slanted through the tall glass atrium, catching in the brushed gold of the massive welcome banner that hung over the entrance. Women in TCH, Rising Founders, Rising Futures. Beneath the title, the names shimmered like trophies, each one written in the same elegant serif, spaced just so, equal in font and finish. And there, near the top, centered, clean, undeniable, was mine. Vanessa Hughes, founder and CEO, PulseLink. I stood still in front of it for a long moment, hands loosely clasped in front of me, taking it in, not just the banner, but everything behind it. The 100 versions of me who had worked without acknowledgement, spoken without being heard, pitched to empty rooms, smiled through family dinners where I was the punchline. That name on the wall didn't just belong to the woman who now led a team of engineers and analysts, who negotiated licensing deals across 3 continents. It belonged to the woman who had once sat in a freezing co-working space at 3 a.m. with ramen noodles and an old MacBook, wondering if it was worth continuing. Who coded, designed, and marketed everything herself when no one else believed in her vision. Who attended meetups alone. Who was told by a panel of men in suits that her idea was too ambitious for her stage. It belonged to me, every version of me. I didn't know anyone was behind me until I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned and smiled. Harold Langston, in a navy suit again, more casual this time, no tie. The same calm, shrewd gaze. He extended his hand. Still the most underestimated powerhouse in the room, he asked. I laughed. A real laugh, not the polite, guarded kind I used to offer at those country club dinners. This one came from somewhere deeper. Only by my mom, I said. He grinned, warm and a little proud. That won't last. But I already knew something he didn't need to say. It didn't matter anymore. That night at the club, when my mother's voice rang out with that dismissive, performative laugh, when she waved me away like a side note in her monologue of success, that was the last time her opinion had the power to pierce me. Something shifted in me that evening. Not because Harold had defended me, not because the room had fallen silent, but because I had stayed silent and strong. It was the moment I realized I had already earned the life I wanted, that her approval was a currency I no longer traded in. I turned back toward the banner. Someone snapped a photo nearby. There were clusters of young women chatting, holding notebooks and coffee cups, glancing at name tags. A few glanced my way, whispering. I recognized that look. It wasn't about the outfit or the hair. It was curiosity, recognition, aspiration. I'd been that woman once, standing at the back of the room, scribbling notes furiously, hoping to ask one question before the keynote left the stage. And now I was here, not as a guest, not as someone's plus one, not as someone barely employed. I was here because I built something. No one gave it to me. No one handed me a shortcut or opened a door out of pity. I pushed until it opened, and then I built more doors for others to walk through. I thought about all the women who would be in that audience, women with ideas, with obstacles, with self-doubt planted by voices that sounded too much like family. I thought about the story I would tell on that stage, not the glossy one, but the real one, the painful, relentless, exhilarating climb, the mistakes, the loneliness, the quiet victories, the moment my mother called me a joke in front of a room full of people, and the moment that same room turned its eyes toward me and saw something different. That's the story that matters. The one that doesn't end with applause, but with ownership. I glanced at Harold again. He was looking at the banner too, nodding slightly, as if he could see the story etched behind every name. I could feel his belief in me, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that counts. And still, even with all the validation, all the change, I knew something profound. I didn't need her applause. I'd had my voice. I had my name. I had my company. She could keep laughing in her circles of glass and cutlery. I was busy writing checks, building teams, changing lives, winning, and not in the way she once defined it. In mine.